Hi friends, welcome to Cracku's VRC video series. Every week we'll be bringing you 3 important tests for VRC, important questions that you must solve regularly so that you can ace VRC section. VRC section is one of those sections where consistent practice is extremely important. You see the gains after a few months. There is no immediate improvement in VRC. So in such cases, you have to put in efforts regularly for months on end before you see any improvement. With that thought in mind, what we have decided is that we will give you regular tests, 3 a week, which you can solve along with us. We'll also give you a PDF of the question so you can actually try attempting the set by yourself and then solve it along with us. So look at the PDF, download it, try to solve the RC or the VA questions, then see the video. Do this consistently. These are only 3 tests a week, so it is extremely doable. But do this consistently and slowly over time you will see yourself improving. So I hope to see you come in every single week and solve these 3 tests. If you need more VRC practice tests, just search for Cracku VRC sets and you will get a lot more tests like these. Keep solving, keep practicing and keep getting better. I hope to see all of you completely crack the VRC section in CAT 2026.
Hi friends, welcome to Cracku's video series. I'm Sayali Ma'am. In this particular video, we'll be taking a look at a RC passage which is based on understanding what are institutions. It's a philosophical passage and it's a bit of a heavy passage. Whenever we have heavy passages like this, what I try to do is try to cut every single paragraph into sub-paragraphs so that we write the main point of each sub-paragraph rather than digesting an entire long paragraph on its own. So let's take a look at the passage. We'll go paragraph by paragraph and then take a look at the questions. Okay. We begin with the emergence of philosophy of the social sciences as an arena of thought and as a set of social institutions. The two characterizations overlap but are not congruent. Academic disciplines are social institutions. My view is that institutions are all those social entities that organize action. They link acting individuals into social structures. So basically, how do you think of social sciences? You can think of them as academic disciplines, as arenas of thought, essentially as a thought discipline as such, or you can look at social sciences as institutions, social institutions as such. These are two different definitions of looking at two different ways of looking at social sciences. They overlap, they are not mutually exclusive, but they kind of overlap, but they are not exactly the same also, they are not congruent also. The author believes that academic disciplines are social institutions. He basically feels that what is a social institution? Any way in which people interact together, act together, coordinate together are essentially institutions as such. So essentially two ways of looking at social sciences. Either as arena of thought and institutions. Then the author goes on to tell what he feels are institutions. Definition of institutions. So my view is that institutions are all those social entities that organize action. They link acting individuals into social structures. There are various kinds of institutions. Hegelians and Marxists emphasize universal institutions such as family, rituals, governance, economy and military. These are mostly institutions that just grew. Perhaps in some imaginary beginning of time, they spontaneously appeared. In their present incarnations, however, they are very much the product of conscious attempts to mold and plan them. So he gives an example of, so he gives the definition of what an institution is, and he says that, okay, there are these universal institutions that have just grown. They maybe have started from some point of time naturally, but right now they are pretty much molded, planned, acted on as such. And universal institutions are given and how they came about and grow. So organic emergence plus inorganic changes to it. Okay. We have family law, established and de-established churches, constitutions and laws, including those governing the economy and the military. Institutions deriving from statute like joint stock companies are formal by contrast with informal ones such as friendships. There are some institutions that come in both for informal and formal variants as well as mixed ones. Consider the fact that the stock exchange and the black market are both market institutions, one formal, one not. Consider further that there are many features of the work of the stock exchange that rely on informal, non-codifiable agreements, not least the language used for communication. To be precise, mixtures are the norm. From constitutions at the top to bylaws near the bottom, we are always adding to or tinkering with early institutions. The groan and the design are intertwined. So essentially, he goes deeper into what is an institution, and he starts with the institutions of how there are universal institutions like the family, rituals, churches, military, government, and how these have also become, these are organized. They grew up probably at some point of time naturally, but these are also organized. And essentially, he says that those that are organized are, say, formal, those that are not organized or codified are informal, but essentially everything is like a mixture of them. Whatever you can consider as formal also has an informal base. Like for example, the stock market also has an informal base as such, and essentially mixtures are like the most institutions are essentially mixtures as such. So forms of institutions: formal, informal, and mixtures. And how every institution is kind of under constantly being tinkered with as such. Now let's take a look at the next paragraph. It is usual in social thought to treat culture and tradition as different from and although alongside institutions. The view taken here is different. Culture and tradition are subsets of institutions analytically isolated for explanatory or expository purposes. Some social scientists have taken all institutions, even purely local ones, to be entities that satisfy basic human needs under local conditions. Others differed and declared any structure of reciprocal roles and norms as institutions. Most of these differences are differences of emphasis rather than disagreements. Let us straddle all these versions and present institutions very generally as structures that serve to coordinate the actions of individuals. Institutions themselves have no aims or purpose other than those given to them by the actors or used by actors to explain to them. So basically the author says that what is an institution? Some people say that culture and tradition are not part of institutions. Some people believe that they are a subset of this, only needed for like, they are only separated only for like the sake of understanding or explaining them. Some believe that things are not part of institutions. Some believe that anything which has a reciprocal role are institutions. So there are contrasting ways of looking at what is an institution. So the author says, let's leave all of these disagreements aside. Let's define institutions very generally. Anything which essentially involves like essentially the author wants to say that anything which has serves the role of coordinating actions of individuals, we'll call it as an institution as such. Whether essentially it has no aim or purpose other than what the actors give it. So the author adopts a broad definition of what is an institution. So let us take a look at the last paragraph. Language is the formative institution for social life and for science. Both formal and informal language is involved, naturally grown or designed. Language is all of these to varying degrees. Languages are paradigms of institutions or, from another perspective, nested set of institutions. Syntax, semantics, lexicon, and alphabet character sets are all institutions within the larger institutional framework of a written language. Natural languages are typical examples of what Ferguson called the result of human action, but not the execution of any human design. Reformed natural languages and artificial languages introduce design into their modification or refinements of natural language. Above all, languages are paradigms of institutional tools that function to coordinate. So essentially what is being discussed over here, the author is saying that language is also an institution. So the author says that they are their nested set of institutions, the like grammar rules, everything, etc., are also institutions within the larger framework of linguistics or written language. Natural language is an example of like an institution which organically develops, but then later on is like when you have artificial languages, they are essentially rules added to the natural language as such. So essentially in this particular paragraph, he discusses how language is also a form of is an institution as such. So through the paragraph, what we see is that the author discusses what is an institution. This I would think is a preface to a idea of where he is trying to explore what are institutions or what are the rules of institutions, how to understand institutions. Before that, you would have to preface all of the discussion by identifying what are institutions. So he begins by saying that, okay, in social sciences we try to separate out, okay, this is institution, this is an arena of thought. But essentially he believes that let us take a broader view of what are institutions. Anywhere in which in any way which actually people coordinate or brings people to act together are institutions. He explains like the most universal institutions that are there, and how most institutions that are there are also part codified, part formal, part informal, part organic, part inorganic. So essentially he is describing what are institutions as such. Then he goes on to how culture and tradition can also be considered as subsets of institutions. He basically says, let's adopt a broad definition of what is an institution. He goes on to say, you know what, language is also a form of institutions. So he's essentially trying to answer through this passage what are institutions, what could be, what do we, when we try to understand what are institutions, what could be considered as institutions as such. So now that we understand what the author is trying to do through this passage, let us take a look at the questions. The first question is, consider the fact that the stock exchange and the black market are both market institutions, one formal and one not. Which of the following statements best explains this quote in the context of the passage? So the author basically says it over here, okay. The author says that we have family law, established and de-established churches. Institutions deriving from statute like joint stock companies are formal by contrast with informal ones such as friendships. There are some institutions that come in both informal and formal variants as well as mixed ones. Consider the fact that stock exchange and the black market are both market institutions, one formal, one not. So essentially what is the author saying? That even in the same sector you have formal as well as informal, and most cases you find a mixture of them. He goes on to say that even in the stock exchange you rely on informal non-codifiable agreements, not least the language used in communication. So essentially he is saying that nothing is purely formal, nothing is purely informal also. The most of the cases you have a mixture of institutions, and essentially institutions both formal and informal exist, and even in the same sector you will find a overlap of them. Everything will be like there can be both formal and informal, and a mixture of things even in the same domain, in the same, if you consider the same type of institutions also, you will have variants, both formal and informal variants in the same area as such. So let us take a look at the options. Market instruments can be formally traded in the stock exchange and informally traded in the black market. The formal and informal are not about how they are traded. Formal and informal are about how that institution is set up. So like a stock market is set up by statute. It is set up by giving or like passing laws. You have a code of conduct. Black market is not set up by passing any laws or passing any statute. It does not have a codified book of laws as such. It essentially operates informally. So it's not, the formal and informal is about the nature of the institution and not how the trading occurs. So this essentially distorts what is given in the paragraph. The reason why it is used there is essentially used to show how there is like the one format of institution is a formal institution, one format of the institution is an informal institution. So it changes that into the way how it is traded and not how the institution is defined in itself. So A is incorrect. The stock exchange and the black market are both organized to function by rules, but that is not what is the point. They have their own rules. One has a formal set of rules, one is formally established, the other has an informal set of rules. It is informally established. The one is codified, it is led by statute, the other is not codified. So this is also missing that. They have rules, but what is the difference? The difference is that this is a formal institution, this is an informal institution. C is the stock exchange and black market are examples of how even within the same domain, different kinds of institution can coexist. That is exactly what the author is trying to say through that particular area. He is trying to say that there are like a spectrum of institutions, formal, informal, a mixture of both, everything is there. Even within the same domain you will find variants of institutions as such. So essentially he's trying to say how it isn't clear cut that okay, this is formal, this is informal, these type of institutions can only be formal, these type of institutions can only be informal. That is not there. So he's trying to make that particular point through this particular example. So only option C catches that how even in the same area you can have two different types of institutions. So C is the right reason. The stock exchange and the black market are both dependent on the market to survive. That is also not given, and that is not the point. The point being made here about is how both formal and informal markets exist in the same area as such. So D also misses that, only C is the right answer. Let us take a look at the second question. All of the following inferences from the passage are false except as concepts, culture and tradition have no analytical, explanatory and expository power, especially when they are treated in isolation. This is opposite of what is given. He says that you consider them separate from institutions only for expository or analytical reasons. You consider culture separate or tradition separate so that you understand them. You separate them only for understanding as such. It is given clearly. The view taken here is different. Are subsets of institution analytically isolated for explanatory or expository purposes. So the idea that they have no explanatory power or expository power is clearly incorrect. So this is false. So I can eliminate it. I have to essentially find the true inference. So this is a false inference. I can eliminate it. Option B is the institution of friendship cannot be found in the institution of joint stock companies because the first is an informal institution while the second is a formal one. This is again something that the author says, like explicitly says no to. What he says is that one is formal, the other is informal. But even in formal institutions, for example, if you take the case of stock markets, many of the underlying aspects of formal institutions are also informal. So he's definitely not saying that if something is formal, it can have no informal aspect to it. So he'll definitely not, we cannot infer that something which is a formal institution like joint stock companies cannot have anything informal in it like friendship, because stock markets which are formally codified also have an informal base to it. So B also cannot be essentially inferred. So this is also a false inference. Institutions like the family, rituals, governance, economy and the military are natural and cannot be consciously modified. Again, not true, because they are something that essentially they appeared at some point of time naturally, but they are very much product of conscious attempts to mold and plan them. So it's not that they cannot be modified, they are actively being modified, actively being molded. So this is also incorrect. This is a false inference. Natural language refers to the stage of language development where no conscious human intent is evident in the formation of language. This is from the last paragraph where he says natural languages are typical examples of what Ferguson called the result of human action but not the execution of any human design. So human design is not there, which means that there is no intent, there is no direction. It develops out of human action but not out of human like design or human direction saying okay, this should be there, this should not be there. So this is true. There is no conscious human intent that is evident at the formation. When conscious human intent enters, it becomes like a part natural, part artificial language as such. So D is the right answer. So D would be the correct answer to choose. Third question is, in the first paragraph of the passage, what are the two characterizations that are seen as overlapping but not congruent? So we identified it as essentially arena of thought is one one way of looking. The other one is one characterization, the other is institutions. So let us take a look at the options. An arena of thought and academic disciplines. Academic disciplines is essentially arena of thought. Essentially it's like saying that social sciences are basically just about thinking, and the other way of looking at it is they are actually things that affect or manage our lives. It's not basically just all thought and all academic thinking, but it is something that actually affects our life. So the two ways of looking at it as an entirely academic thing. The second way of looking at it as a socially organizing force, and those are the two different characterizations. The arena of thought and academic disciplines are essentially the same thing. They are referring to the same thing, that is looking at social sciences from an entirely academic point of view. So this is incorrect. They are the same thing as such. Individuals and social structures, no. Individuals are not one. Basically, you're looking at the characterization as an academic discipline versus a social institution. So social structures is right, but individuals is incorrect. The philosophy of the social sciences and a set of social institutions. Philosophy of social sciences is characterized into two parts. This is not one of the characterizations. The split is of philosophy of social sciences. So this is incorrect. Academic disciplines and institutions. This is exactly the right way of splitting philosophy of social sciences. These are the two characterizations that are mentioned. Academic disciplines is essentially a stand-in for arena of thought. So D is the right answer. Let us take a look at question 4. Which of the following statement best represents the essence of the passage? So essentially throughout the passage he is trying to define what are institutions. Says essentially, okay, this is an institution, this is an institution. He tries to adopt a broad perspective or definition of what is an institution so that he can then maybe talk about what are institutions, the characteristics of them, etc. So let us take a look at the options. It is usual in social thought to treat culture and tradition as different from institutions. This is given in the passage, but it is a fact mentioned. This is not the crux of the passage at all. In fact, the author says that culture and tradition are subsets of institutions. That is the point he's trying to make. This is an unrelated fact mentioned in the passage, which is not the main argument. Language is the fundamental formal institution for social life and for science. No. Language is a formative institution, but fundamental formal institution is definitely not the case. He doesn't say this is fundamental, this is formal, this is informal. In fact, language is not is both formal and informal language as such. So it's not fundamental formal institution at all. So B is also incorrect, and he doesn't talk. His focus is not just on language, his focus is on institutions. What all are institutions? He mentions everything in context of, is this an institution, is this an institution? So the focus is not on language, but rather on institutions. The stock exchange and black market are both market institutions. Like A, this is a fact mentioned, but this is not the crux of the argument. The argument is about what is an institution. C is just a fact mentioned, not at all the focus. Institutions are structures that serve to coordinate the actions of individuals. Exactly the point. The author is trying to identify what is an institution. Is this an institution? This is an institution. Let us adopt a broad definition. And this is the adopted definition that he agrees on, that it helps to serve coordinate actions of individuals. So D is the main point of the passage, and D would be the right answer.
Stop wondering which IIMs will call you. Get the most accurate answer. Cracku's IIM called Predictor analyzes everything, your academics, your work experience weightage, and even the JAB process, all based on the latest RTI data. Know the exact cutoffs and your precise chance in seconds. Ready for clarity? Just Google search Cracku IIM called Predictor. Your personalized IIM report just is search away.